He didn't even hesitate. His eyes met mine across the room, calm, polished, rehearsed, and he said it like it meant nothing. "This table is for family only." Then he pointed toward the back, toward a lonely chair pressed up against the wall like some forgotten afterthought. "My name is Daniel. I'm 34. And until that moment, I had spent most of my life believing that if I just stayed quiet enough, helpful enough, low maintenance enough, I could earn my place in the room. Any room. Especially his. My older brother Jacob had always been the golden one, charming, driven, magnetic in that unexplainable way that made people forgive even his worst behavior. Growing up, I didn't mind orbiting around his light. He made things feel possible when we were kids. He taught me how to climb trees, helped me with math homework, let me tag along to parties when he got his license. But somewhere along the way, that warmth began to cool. He grew distant, sharper. Like being related to me became a chore he couldn't wait to offload. It started with small things, unread texts, vague replies, last-minute canceled plans, birthday cards sent 2 weeks late with just his name scribbled inside. I always made excuses. He was busy, stressed, caught up with work. I told myself closeness looked different when you were adults. But deep down, something in me pulled tighter every time I saw him light up around others. Friends, co-workers, Amanda, and dim down around me. Our parents divorced when I was 15. Jacob was 18 then. Almost gone already. Mom never fully recovered. And Dad slipped into a second life that never included us equally. I became the quiet one. The one who tried to keep peace between broken halves. Jacob, though, he became untouchable. The one no one wanted to upset, especially me. When he met Amanda, I wanted to believe it was a turning point. She was kind in that open-hearted way that made people instantly trust her. She asked about my work, complimented my cooking, always made space for me in conversations. I thought maybe, through her, Jacob and I would find our way back. But as the wedding neared, I felt it happening again. That slow, quiet distancing that doesn't scream, but stings all the same. No groomsman role. No invite to planning dinners. No calls. Just a formal invite, sent late, with my last name spelled wrong. Still, I showed up. I wore a suit he once complimented, a deep charcoal gray. I brought a small, personal gift, a photo album I'd spent weeks assembling. Us as kids, family trips, our first Christmas after the divorce. I restored the images, printed them on heavy paper, bound them in leather. It wasn't flashy, but it meant something. When I walked into that reception hall, all cream linens and soft music, I spotted him near the front, surrounded by smiling people. He didn't come to greet me. He saw me, but waited for me to go to him. And when I did, album in hand, smile rehearsed, he glanced at the seating chart and said those 7 words, like I was someone who had wandered in by mistake, like I didn't belong. "This table is for family only." It wasn't cruel. That's what cut the deepest. It was casual. Like giving directions to the bathroom. No apology. No awkwardness. Just a simple gesture toward the back of the room, where a single chair waited by the emergency exit. Not even a table. Just a chair. I looked at it. Then at him. Waiting for something. A flicker of doubt. Regret. Discomfort. But he'd already turned away. Already laughing with someone else. I walked to the chair and sat down, not because I accepted it, but because I needed space. A moment to breathe, to swallow that quiet humiliation. A moment to remind myself that I wasn't here by accident, and I wasn't alone. Because what Jacob didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I hadn't come to his wedding just to attend it. I'd brought someone with me, and they were about to change everything. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels strategic, like it's been placed between you and someone else to remind you of your place. That's the kind of silence Jacob had been handing me for years. And for just as long, I tried to call it something else. Space, adulthood, independence. I told myself it was normal, that brothers drift, that family doesn't need to talk every day to still be family. But the truth was, I was always the one reaching out, always the one keeping us connected, and he was always just responding. Barely. After college, we both ended up in the same city. I remember thinking how lucky that was, how we'd get to be close again, like we were as kids. I imagined Sunday dinners, game nights, being that kind of grown-up sibling duo who actually enjoyed each other's company. But it didn't turn out that way. He was busy. Always busy. "Work is crazy right now," he'd say. Or, "Amanda's parents are in town." Or, "We're still unpacking." I'd nod, smile, pretend I understood. And then, inevitably, I'd find out that he had been out that night, just not with me. A friend from work, Amanda's cousin, some guy from college I didn't even remember. Still, I held on to the scraps. A quick lunch every few months, a like on a social media post, a text on Thanksgiving, short, no emojis, no follow-up. I took what I could get. I told myself this was enough. But even those small things began to vanish. Slowly. Almost kindly. Like a soft fade-out. The hardest part wasn't what he did. It was how normal he made it seem. Like it wasn't cruel, just practical. Like it made perfect sense that I wasn't included in his inner circle anymore. That I had somehow disqualified myself without realizing it. And the more he pulled away, the more I bent myself out of shape trying to make it easy for him to come back. I remember this one afternoon, maybe a year before the wedding. I had just gotten some good news at work. A promotion I didn't see coming. I called him, excited, and he didn't answer. I waited, hoping he'd call back. He didn't. So I texted, "Got the promotion." Just that. No pressure. Just sharing. He replied, 4 days later. "Nice. Congrats." 2 words. No punctuation. I stared at the screen for a while, then locked the phone and told myself I was being too sensitive. But it stayed with me. The way small moments started to sting more than they should. The way his name on my phone no longer made me feel seen. Just small. And Amanda. She noticed. She always tried to make up for it, I think. She'd invite me to things he forgot to mention. She'd send me updates, photos, even ask how I was doing when Jacob didn't. I appreciated it, really. But it also made things worse. Like she knew there was a gap between us and was trying to patch it without naming it. When they got engaged, I was happy for them. I mean that. But I also held on to a quiet, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to reconnect. That weddings were about bringing people together. That he'd want me beside him. That he'd remember the way we used to be. But when the group text went out, the one listing groomsmen and events and flight info for Amanda's family, my name wasn't there. I wasn't part of the group. I had to find out from Amanda, who apologized like it was her fault, even though it wasn't. I laughed it off, told her I was just glad to be invited, and I meant it, on the surface. But deep down, something in me cracked. A small, hairline fracture. I had tried so hard not to be a burden, not to ask for anything, not to make him uncomfortable, but I realized I had spent years convincing myself that his distance was neutral, when really, it was rejection dressed up in quiet. And the worst part? I still showed up. I still bought the suit. I still made the album. I still hoped that maybe, on this day of all days, he'd remember that I was his brother. But that moment by the table proved me wrong, and what came next made it impossible to ignore. I thought the chair was the lowest point. I really did. I sat in the back of that reception hall, hands folded neatly in my lap like some distant cousin who accidentally got a seat because someone miscounted. The music played, the champagne flowed, and I told myself it was fine. I'd still congratulate him. I'd still smile for the photos. I'd still keep the peace. But then the slideshow began. A big white screen lit up at the front of the room. Amanda's cousin tapped a glass, and the lights dimmed. The first image flickered on. A photo of Jacob as a kid, maybe 6 or 7, grinning with ice cream dripping down his arm. Laughter filled the room. Everyone leaned in, and I waited, because I knew what was coming. Our childhood was full of photos. Birthdays, vacations, Halloween costumes, lazy afternoons in our grandparents' backyard. I knew those pictures. I knew because I'd spent hours restoring them, cropping them, scanning them for the album I gave him earlier that day. I figured maybe, he'd use some for this. But he hadn't. The slideshow went on. Jacob playing baseball. Jacob with Amanda. Jacob on a fishing trip with Amanda's dad, Jacob at prom, college, Christmas with Amanda's family, Jacob. Always surrounded by people who weren't me. 10 minutes, 50 photos. Not one included me. I waited for it. Just one. A blurry shot from childhood. A group picture. Anything. But my face never appeared. Not even in the background. It was like I had been erased. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until the lights came back on. People applauded. Amanda leaned her head on his shoulder, touched his arm gently. He smiled. That perfect, practiced smile that had always made people fall in line. And I sat there, completely still, like I was trying to become part of the wall. I felt it then. Not just the exclusion, but the intentionality behind it. This wasn't just a forgetful brother. This wasn't an oversight. This was curated, edited, deliberate. That album I'd made? The one wrapped in ribbon, filled with pictures of the two of us in costumes, matching pajamas, sitting side by side at the hospital when Mom broke her wrist. None of it had made the cut. He hadn't even opened it. And suddenly, all those small moments, the ignored texts, the late invites, the half smiles, they sharpened. They formed a pattern I could no longer excuse. I wasn't just distant to him, I was disposable. I looked around the room, everyone clapping, laughing, toasting, celebrating a man who had rewritten his story, and left me out of the chapters. Something in me twisted. It wasn't anger yet. It wasn't even sadness. It was disbelief. A cold, steady numbness that crept through my chest and into my stomach. I wasn't just forgotten. I had been removed. There's a specific kind of pain that comes not from being hurt by someone, but from realizing they never saw you the way you saw them. I had spent years idolizing him, making excuses for him, loving him like he was still the boy who pulled me out of the creek when I slipped on wet rocks. But he wasn't that boy anymore. And I was just a name on a guest list, a body in a seat, a brother in title only. That night, sitting in the back, invisible, something in me broke open. And for the first time in my life, truly the first, I saw Jacob clearly. Not as the hero of our childhood. Not as the man I kept hoping he'd be. But as someone who had made his choice. And the part he didn't know, the part he had overlooked in his perfectly edited day, was that I had made a choice, too. And mine was sitting just outside that room. Waiting. I didn't leave right away. I sat there long after the slideshow ended, watching people rise from their chairs to mingle, refill drinks, take selfies near the floral arch. Their laughter floated across the room like music from a different life. One I was no longer part of, maybe never was. The lights glowed golden and soft, casting everything in warmth except the seat I was in. Mine stayed in shadow. I think I needed to feel it, that isolation. I needed it to settle, to become real, so I wouldn't keep finding ways to explain it away. At some point, the music changed. A slow, familiar song started up, the kind of classic ballad that usually fills a wedding dance floor with tipsy relatives swaying out of sync. People began to pair off, one by one. I watched them, Amanda's aunts, Jacob's co-workers, even some cousins I hadn't seen in years. They laughed, stumbled, twirled. I stayed seated. Then I stood up, not in protest, not to cause a scene, just because I needed air. I slipped out the side door, unnoticed, and stepped into the cold. The sun had started to set, and the evening air was crisp in that late autumn kind of way, sharp enough to wake you up. I walked a few feet from the building and leaned against the wooden railing of the deck, overlooking a small patch of trees dressed in amber and rust. For the first time that day, I breathed without effort. There were no eyes on me here. No polite smiles or hushed apologies. Just space. Just air. I could still hear the muffled music inside. I imagined Jacob giving a speech. Confident, charming, full of inside jokes and curated sentiment. I wondered if he'd notice I was gone. If Amanda would. Maybe. But I didn't care anymore. In that moment, I wasn't trying to be seen. I was trying to see myself again. I pulled my phone from my pocket and stared at it. For a second, I hovered over our old thread, mine and Jacob's, messages stretching back years, filled mostly with my words and his monosyllables. I thought about deleting them. I didn't. Instead, I opened another thread, one I hadn't touched since arriving. I typed a message, paused, deleted it, then typed again. "You still close by?" The reply came almost instantly. "Yeah, still in the car." "You okay?" I didn't answer right away, just stared at the screen, then out at the trees again. That person, the one waiting outside, wasn't just someone I brought for company. They were the first person in a long time who made me feel visible without having to prove my worth. They had offered to come, even when I warned them it might be awkward. They knew I wasn't part of the inner circle, knew I might end up sitting alone, and came anyway. And I had asked them to wait in the car. Why? Because deep down, a part of me still wanted to be accepted by someone who had shown, over and over, that he wasn't interested in knowing me anymore. I had sidelined someone kind and loyal for a chance at crumbs from my brother's table. I hated that realization, but I sat with it. That night, I didn't go back into the reception. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't explain. I walked around the side of the building, found the car, and got in. They looked at me. Not with pity, not with questions. Just quiet understanding. Like they knew. Like they had always known. We didn't talk for a while. Just sat there, parked under an orange sky, watching the wind scatter leaves across the gravel. And in that stillness, I felt something shift. It wasn't anger. Not yet. And it wasn't closure either. But it was something new. A step away from needing permission to exist in someone else's story. A step toward writing my own. Inside that hall, the celebration continued. I could still hear the faint echo of Jacob's voice through the walls. Smooth, certain, well-rehearsed. But it didn't pull me anymore. Something inside me had already started walking away. We drove in silence for a while. Not the kind that presses down on you, but the kind that gives you room to breathe. The road out of the venue wound through open fields and wooded turns, scattered with the last light of day. I kept my window cracked just enough to feel the air against my face. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. And that, in itself, felt new. Sitting beside me in the driver's seat was someone who had no obligation to be there. Someone who didn't share my blood, my name, or my family's complicated history, but who had still shown up. For me. His name was Mason. We'd met 8 months earlier at a volunteer event, a food drive, nothing glamorous. He made a joke about the dented cans I was trying too hard to stack evenly, and I laughed harder than I meant to. Something about him, the way he noticed people, the way he listened when most people waited to talk, stayed with me. We kept crossing paths until we stopped pretending it was coincidence. Mason wasn't flashy. He didn't have Jacob's polish or perfect posture, but he had a way of looking at you that made it hard to lie, even to yourself. And over time, without pushing, he started to peel back layers I didn't even know I had. He never tried to fix me. He just saw me. All of me. When I told him about the wedding, I downplayed it. Said I didn't expect much, that it was just one of those family things. He didn't press. He just asked if I wanted company. I said yes. And when we arrived, I asked him to wait in the car. He didn't argue. Just nodded. Said he'd be nearby. Now, as we drove through the quiet back roads, I realized how much that meant. Not just the waiting, but the trust it required. The kind of trust I'd been chasing for years in the wrong places. "You hungry?" he asked finally, breaking the silence without shattering it. I nodded, not sure I could eat, but willing to try. We pulled into a roadside diner a few miles down, the kind with flickering neon signs and sticky booths that smell like syrup and burnt coffee. We sat in the back. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. The waitress came, took our orders. I picked at my food. Mason didn't push, just let the silence work its way through, and when I finally spoke, it wasn't dramatic. I didn't unload everything. I just said. He didn't include a single picture of me. Mason looked at me, then leaned back in the booth. That says more about him than it does about you. Simple. Steady. Like he meant it. I stared down at my plate, at the crumpled napkin in my hand, and something inside me shifted again. Not with a bang, but a slow, steady pull away from the gravity I'd lived under for so long. For years, I had been measuring my worth in reflections, in how Jacob saw me, how others accepted me, how much space I was allowed to take up. But sitting there, in that rundown diner with someone who had chosen to stay beside me when he had every reason not to, I realized something important. I didn't need to be accepted by someone who had already made peace with cutting me out. I didn't need to earn my place anymore. Later that night, back at my apartment, I opened the closet and found the album I'd made, the one he never opened. I took it out of the gift bag, unwrapped the ribbon, and flipped through the pages alone. Each photo held a story. Our old backyard, birthday cakes, bike rides, late summer nights with fireflies and scraped knees. It hit me. Looking at those images, those memories mattered. Maybe not to him, but they mattered to me. And they still did. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat on the floor with the album in my lap and let the silence settle around me. Not like a wall this time, but like a soft blanket. Not absence, but space. Mason sat nearby, not saying much. He didn't have to. And for the first time in years, I started to feel something I hadn't let myself feel in a long, long time. Whole. Healing, I've learned, doesn't move in straight lines. It comes in waves, gentle, sometimes, and sometimes sharp enough to knock the air from your lungs. The morning after the wedding, I woke up before sunrise. Mason was still asleep on the couch, one arm slung over his chest like a shield. The apartment was quiet. I got up, made coffee, and sat by the window, staring at the sky slowly shifting from deep navy to gray-blue. The streets outside were empty. The silence inside was heavier than usual. Not oppressive, but full. Like it was carrying things I hadn't sorted through yet. I thought I'd feel relieved. I had walked away. I had chosen myself. I hadn't let Jacob ruin me, not entirely. And yet, the ache remained. I wish I could say I felt proud, strong, liberated. But that's not how it works. Not when the wound runs that deep. What I felt, honestly, was tired. Not just physically, emotionally, spiritually. Like I'd been holding up the walls of something cracked and crumbling for years. And now that I'd finally let it fall, I didn't know what to do with the space. I kept wondering if I had made everything up in my head. Maybe I'd been too sensitive. Maybe the photos didn't include me because there wasn't room. Maybe the chair in the back wasn't intentional. Maybe Jacob just didn't think I'd care. But then I'd remember the way he looked at me. Calm, distant, measured. And I knew. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. And somehow, knowing that made it worse. Because it meant I hadn't misunderstood. It meant I just mattered less. That's the part no one tells you. That even when you understand someone's behavior, even when you can explain it, even when you can name the pattern and trace the shape of the damage, it still hurts. Knowledge doesn't numb the sting. If anything, it makes it sharper, cleaner. I kept flipping through the photo album I had made, page by page. Our mother smiling through tears at Jacob's high school graduation. Us as kids, faces sticky with popsicles, sitting on the porch in mismatched pajamas. Dad holding both of us at a beach we never returned to. There were fingerprints on some of the photos, mine, from when I'd pressed them down with care. Each image whispered something. You were there. You mattered, too. This was real. But now, it felt like a museum, a private one no one else had ever visited, and maybe never would. I thought about calling him, just to ask why, just to say, was it really that easy for you to forget me? But I knew what would happen. He'd deny it. He'd minimize. He'd say I was overthinking, and I'd end up apologizing for asking the question at all. Because that's what I'd done for most of my life. Made myself smaller so he wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Bit my tongue so he wouldn't feel accused. Smiled through silence so he wouldn't feel guilt. But it had cost me pieces of myself, one at a time. And now that I had stepped outside that pattern, even slightly, the loss came into view. Not just the loss of him, but of years I'd spent walking on eggshells that he never even noticed were there. And yet, part of me still missed him. That's the twisted truth of it. I missed the idea of him. The older brother I used to believe in. The one who taught me how to skip stones, who held my hand crossing the street, who told me once, when I was 8, that I'd always be part of his team. I missed that boy. I don't know when he stopped being that version of himself. Maybe life changed him. Maybe our family's fracture turned him inward. Or maybe he was never who I thought he was. But letting go of the story I'd been telling myself, that was the real heartbreak. Not losing him. Losing the hope of him. The hope that one day he'd call just to check in, that he'd introduce me to his friends with pride, that he'd look at me and see someone worth knowing, not just someone who shared his blood. That morning, as the sun finally crested the rooftops, I closed the album and set it gently on the table. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't need to keep it open anymore either. It was 3 days after the wedding when I got the message. I was at work, sorting through emails, trying to focus, trying not to keep replaying that slideshow in my head. I'd been doing better, or at least pretending to. Mason had stayed over the night before, and we'd watched some ridiculous reality show with fake drama that made mine feel distant, even manageable. I laughed more than I expected to. And then my phone buzzed. It was a tag on social media. Jacob had posted a series of photos from the wedding. The official album, he called it. Smiling faces, elegant poses, Amanda in her lace gown looking stunning. Jacob in his tux looking like he belonged on the cover of a magazine. I should have ignored it. But of course, I clicked. The first photo was of the head table. All smiles. Amanda's family, a few of Jacob's friends, even distant cousins I barely recognized. Everyone looked radiant, happy, at ease. I wasn't there. Photo after photo, people toasting, hugging, dancing, grinning like life had finally lined up perfectly. My absence wasn't just noticeable, it was loud. And then I saw it. Buried in the middle of the album, tucked between wide-angle shots of the venue and artistic close-ups of champagne flutes, was a picture of the back of the reception hall, the corner where I'd been seated. The photo had been taken from above, from a balcony, capturing a wide shot of the entire room. And there I was, a single figure in the corner, seated alone, head slightly bowed, surrounded by empty space. The caption underneath read, "Every seat filled with love," and something in me snapped. It wasn't just the exclusion anymore. It was the way it had been packaged, polished, shared, made public. It wasn't enough that I had been left out. Now, the world had to see it too. Like the absence had become part of the design. Like I was a shadow Jacob had learned to live with, and then learned to edit out entirely. I stared at the screen for a long time, until the edges of the photo blurred and the room around me dimmed. Then, without thinking, I opened the comments. Dozens of congratulations. So beautiful. What a perfect day. Family is everything. I scrolled and scrolled, looking for anything. A mention, a tag, even my name in a single thread. Nothing. He hadn't just excluded me. He'd erased me, and the world had clicked like. I don't remember standing up. I just remember suddenly being outside, air slicing through my lungs, my hands shaking in a way I couldn't stop. I called Mason, told him I needed air. Told him I couldn't sit in that office pretending to be okay when the entire internet now had proof that I wasn't part of my own family. He picked me up within 20 minutes. We didn't talk. Not right away. I sat in the passenger seat, hands clenched in my lap, eyes locked on the dashboard. My body was still, but inside, it felt like a wire had snapped and was whipping around violently, hitting everything at once. Finally, I said. He posted a picture of me alone, and wrote that every seat was filled with love. Mason gripped the steering wheel tighter, jaw set. You want me to say something to him? No, I said, too quickly. No, that's what he wants. Me angry, me defensive. Me being the dramatic brother again. I laughed, but it came out hollow. It wasn't funny. It was humiliating. That's the thing with families like mine. When you finally speak up, you become the problem. Not the years of silence, not the passive aggression, not the constant erasure, just your reaction. So I said nothing, but something inside me was different now. Before, I had walked away in pain. Now, I was walking away with clarity. There was no repairing this, not when someone takes your absence and turns it into decoration, not when your solitude becomes part of their celebration, not when they make the entire world complicit in pretending you were never there. That night, I opened Jacob's post again. I had looked at it a dozen times by then, like touching a bruise to make sure it still hurts. But this time, I didn't stare at the photo. I didn't zoom in on the blurry figure of myself in the back corner. I didn't read the comments again. I knew what I needed to do. I opened the comment box and typed just 2 words. I was. Then I paused. Not out of doubt, but because I wanted the message to be mine, not a reaction. I deleted the words. I closed the app. And I blocked him. That may sound childish to some people, petty, even. But it wasn't about social media. It was about the symbolism. The quiet, deliberate act of stepping off the stage where he'd kept me as a supporting character in the version of life he wanted to display. I wasn't going to sit in the background anymore while he built his narrative over my silence. I didn't owe him mine. Then I went further. I removed myself from the family group chat I barely contributed to anyway. I took his name off my emergency contact form at work. I even deleted his number. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to stop flinching every time I scrolled past it. It wasn't rage. It wasn't a tantrum. It was release. The next day, Amanda texted me. "Hey, I saw what he posted. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know he used that picture." I stared at the message for a long time. She had always been kind. Too kind, maybe, to survive in a family like ours without making compromises of her own. I believed her. I also knew it didn't change anything. So, I wrote back. "Thank you for saying that. I wish you all the best." And that was it. I didn't offer explanations. I didn't ask for hers. I didn't try to fix it. Because for once, I wasn't going to keep reaching across a distance that only I had been trying to close. Later that week, I started boxing up some old things in my apartment. Not because I was moving, but because I needed the symbolic act. I found old birthday cards from Jacob, one from years ago that said, "Proud to be your big bro," in sharp black ink. I paused, held it in my hands, then I put it in the trash. Some good moments are still part of a painful story, and that's okay. I didn't have to hold on to all of them just because they used to mean something. Especially when the person who gave them to me had already decided they didn't anymore. That weekend, Mason and I drove out of the city. No agenda, just the open road, a few snacks, and music that didn't demand anything from either of us. At one point, he looked over and said, "You've been quiet." I nodded. "I think I'm just breathing again." He smiled. "You should keep doing that." We didn't talk about Jacob after that. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't need to define everything anymore. I had spent years letting that relationship shape the way I saw myself. Now, I was slowly learning how to be someone outside of it. When we got home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Stillness. Not numbness. Not denial. Just quiet. The kind you choose. Before bed, I took the album, the one I'd made for the wedding, and put it in a drawer. I didn't throw it out, but I didn't keep it on display either. It wasn't for him anymore. It was for me. Peace doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't come with music swelling in the background or the perfect quote framed on the wall. It comes in smaller moments, ones that feel almost too quiet to notice at first. Like waking up one morning and realizing you didn't dream about them. Or checking your phone and not hoping to see their name. Or cleaning out a drawer and not hesitating before tossing the things that once made you ache. That's how it started for me. In pieces. In the week that followed, my life didn't change dramatically. I still got up, went to work, made coffee in the same chipped mug. I still passed the same grocery store where I used to bump into Jacob every so often, though now I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't flinch. What changed was inside. The volume of that anxious inner voice, the one constantly asking, "Why not me?" or "What did I do wrong?" began to fade. Not all at once, but enough to notice. Enough to breathe. One afternoon, I cleaned out the small closet in my hallway. I found a box of old photos, letters, concert tickets, fragments from versions of myself I barely remembered. I sat on the floor and sorted through them, not with bitterness, but with a strange kind of gratitude. Not for what had happened, but for the fact that I could finally look at those pieces without needing them to tell me who I was. I chose to keep some. Others I let go. A week later, Jacob texted me. Just 3 words. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I didn't even feel the old hope rise up, the kind that used to make me scramble for another chance, another opening, another way to be accepted. What I felt, honestly, was calm, because I didn't need the conversation. Not anymore. I never replied. Maybe that sounds cold. Maybe to some people, it seems cruel. But it wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries. It was about choosing peace over patterns. And patterns don't change with one message. They change when you decide they don't get to control you anymore. Instead of texting him back, I went outside, took a long walk through the park near my apartment. The air was crisp, still carrying the last of autumn's edge. Kids were playing in the distance. A woman passed me walking her dog. No one knew what I had been through. And in that anonymity, there was freedom. I sat on a bench near the pond, phone still in my pocket, and just watched the water move. I didn't rehearse what I'd say to Jacob. I didn't reread the message. I didn't even think about the wedding. I thought about how it felt to finally not chase anything, to just be still. Mason met me later that night. He brought dinner. We sat at the kitchen table eating from takeout containers, legs brushing under the table, no pressure to fill the silence. He didn't ask about the message. I think he knew I had already answered it, just not with words. I asked him how his day was. We talked about everything and nothing. And when I looked across at him, really looked, I realized something simple and profound. This was what connection was supposed to feel like. Not performance, not pursuit, not a desperate clinging to someone who only ever turned around when they felt guilty or bored, but presence. We finished dinner, did the dishes, turned on a movie, and fell asleep halfway through it on the couch. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, safe, real. And in the quiet, I found something I hadn't expected. A new kind of strength, not loud or defiant, but steady. The kind that says, I don't need to be in someone else's story to matter in my own. Time has a strange way of softening edges without erasing the truth. It's been a few months now. Enough for things to settle, for the noise to die down, for me to breathe in my own space without feeling like I need to explain why. Jacob hasn't reached out again. Maybe he got the message. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. I don't check anymore. Sometimes people ask me if I ever miss him, if I wish things had gone differently. And the answer is, of course I do. I wish he had turned around that day at the wedding. I wish he had looked at me and said, I'm sorry. You belong here. I wish I could have handed him that photo album and seen something flicker behind his eyes. Recognition, gratitude, maybe even love. But that's the version of him I kept waiting for. The version I grew up believing still lived somewhere inside the man he'd become. And part of growing up, really growing up, is accepting that some versions of people only exist in your memory. That holding on to them won't bring them back. It just keeps you stuck. I don't hate Jacob. That's not what this story is about. It's about choosing to stop shrinking myself for someone who didn't ask me to grow. It's about recognizing that family isn't defined by blood, but by presence, by how people show up, how they see you, how they hold space for you in their lives when no one's watching. It's about the quiet decision to stop knocking on closed doors. And more than anything, it's about rediscovering that I am not less because someone else couldn't see my worth. These days, I still keep the photo album. It's in my living room now, not hidden in a drawer, but placed gently on a shelf. Sometimes I take it down, not to feel pain, but to remind myself of the parts that were good, the real ones. Because even in a broken story, there are true moments. And I've learned that I'm allowed to hold on to those, without letting them hold me. Mason and I still take weekend drives. We still make each other laugh with dumb jokes and lazy playlists. And sometimes, in the stillness of a Sunday morning, I catch myself thinking, this is what it means to be chosen. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because someone sees you and says, you're enough. That's all I ever wanted from my brother. But sometimes the peace comes not from getting what you want, but from understanding why you no longer need it. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt like the forgotten seat at the table, if you've ever begged quietly for someone to notice your worth, if you've ever walked away from a room and wondered if you mattered at all, let me tell you this. You did. You do. And the people who are meant to know your worth won't make you fight for a chair. They'll pull one up before you even ask. So here's what I hope for you, and for me. That we keep choosing the rooms where we are loved, not tolerated. That we stop chasing people who make us feel small just to feel like we belong. And that we remember, the story is still ours to write. Thank you for listening to mine. If this story meant something to you, if it made you feel seen, or less alone, consider subscribing to the channel, giving this video a like, and sharing it with someone who might need it today. You never know whose story might start to change, just because they heard yours.